Dubrovnik, deceptively peaceful. Venice, its peaceful hours are numbered. Barcelona is also steeling itself in the early morning. Three unique cities in Europe, with one problem that's getting worse all the time.
They are asking everything. Somebody asked me, at what time does Venice close? There's no time, so Venice is a city. People live here.
This is the third cruise group in 5 minutes.
Hordes of tourists every day, the whole year round. The peak season in some cities in Europe results in a state of emergency.
There's this one day in spring when Dubrovnik stops being our city, when we no longer feel we're living in our city but in a film set.
Local residents suffer from the mass of visitors. They feel pushed out, robbed of their own city, harried by noise, and simply swamped by far too many visitors.
You are destroying Venice, and you are not welcome!
Tourism is going beyond all bounds, not just in Venice. But the locals are not giving up without a fight.
This photo caused such a stir because it came about just when the situation here boiled over.
City tourism in Europe is booming as never before, fueled by aggressive price dumping, budget flights, and the sharing economy trend, which offers cheap accommodation worldwide. How are the authorities dealing with the onslaught?
My job as mayor is running a business. I'm not a mayor, but the head of a company with 15,000 shareholders.
The city as an expanding business model with customers instead of visitors. But how many tourists can a travel destination cope with without losing its identity, its authenticity? And does the enterprise end up in profit?
The real problem is the state of Venice's finances. It's catastrophic. I inherited debts of 800 million euros.
Empty city coffers despite mass tourism. So what happens to all the money brought by the millions of visitors?
When we came in, the tourist department was completely unregulated. No guidelines, no laws. But that's how speculation comes about, and that's an ideal breeding ground for corruption.
Tourism in Europe generates 400 billion euros a year, a voracious market, and the haunt of shady business, of rogues and gamblers, of gambling with few winners and many losers. The Barceloneta district, once one of Barcelona's poorest and shabbiest areas. The photographer Vicenç Forner knew the place when it was still home to 3,000 fishermen. Barceloneta was always a workers' district, which attracted people from outside looking for work. So strangers are actually nothing new. But in the meantime, things have gone too far for the 15,000 inhabitants of Barceloneta. Vicenç Forner understands his neighbor's concern.
We're talking about all the visitors.
We don't want so many tourists here. It's fine that they come, but they should behave and not get drunk on the beach at night and make so much noise.
We used to have a good life here, didn't we?
Yes, we were born here. My sister in 1933, me in 1929.
But mass tourism has not come about by chance. A lot of people have lived in Barceloneta all their lives. Now they're worried about their district, which for a long time was not touched by tourism. In the last 15 years, though, Barceloneta has developed into a magnet for tourists, because it's a perfect combination of city and sea. Since the beach and promenade were remodeled, Barceloneta has become a favorite destination, and not just for the local population. Young people in particular often come for a weekend trip to party. Airlines offer flights to Barcelona for less than 20 euros. Online websites like Airbnb provide cheap overnights in private homes. Their slogan? Welcome home. Photos by Vicens Forner document the changes in his district. A couple of years ago, one of his photos made him famous overnight. A group of male tourists fooling around. The photo went global, as far as Australia. The problems of mass tourism in the Mediterranean city were brought into sharp focus. In Barceloneta, the picture sparked an outcry, the last straw for the locals.
We're a rather unassuming district of people who work hard. We're not very articulate, so when we've something to say, we have to shout it. When the photo appeared everywhere in the media, people here took to the streets with placards and clubs. There were raucous protests. It all triggered a chain reaction, and now they're spraying slogans on the streets.
The graffiti send a clear signal. Tourists are destroying the neighborhood. They should respect the district, or else. The locals are particularly angry that more and more flats are turning into holiday apartments, and that's pushing up rents. The banners call on visitors to stay in hotels and leave the flats for the locals.
Every day, I capture peculiar situations. Not everything's unusual, of course. Tourism is tourism. I travel myself sometimes, and youngsters will be youngsters. But the problem now is that our very success is making us ill, and will soon doubtless be the end of us.
Most inhabitants of Barceloneta are worried that they'll soon no longer be able to afford their own district, a justified concern, since in other districts of Barcelona, single homes are providing 2 dwellings for tourists. As in the Old Quarter, for example, in Barri Gòtic. One outspoken critic of the situation has been an activist and is now the new mayor of Barcelona.
What we simply cannot allow and what we will not accept is losing inhabitants through mass tourism, as we've seen in other cities, especially in Venice, where the city is getting emptier and emptier and increasingly meaningless. It's turning into a sort of theme park where nobody lives anymore and only tourists visit.
Venice, a theme park? The fears of Ada Colau meet with incomprehension from Venice's mayor.
Assuming I understand the charges of Barcelona's mayor correctly, then I think she's misinformed. Instead of making judgments, it might be better for us to talk. I don't know what to say to this Barcelona lady. I can only invite her to come and show her how beautiful the city is. I think she's been shown the wrong parts. She doesn't know Venice at all.
But does the mayor know his own city? He's been in office for a year, he's an entrepreneur, and Venice's first mayor who doesn't live in the historic centre, but on the mainland. Venice is way beyond the phase Barcelona is currently undergoing. The number of people living in the historic centre has steadily declined since 1950, from 175,000 back then to just 55,000 today. They're swamped by the stream of visitors. How many actually come, nobody knows for sure. The city only counts overnight stays, not day visitors.
No, the officials have absolutely no interest in knowing. If everyone knew that 30 million tourists a year come to Venice, of whom 29.9 million visit St. Mark's Square, then of course no one with any sense would want to go to Venice anymore. So the real figures are just not made public.
The figure is confirmed by the nature conservation organization Italia Nostra. The millions of visitors don't bring in much to the city's coffers. They're mainly day trippers who don't pay tourist tax. That's only due for stays above 12 hours. But the private sector has a massive turnover, 1.8 billion euros a year, and that's official. Venice has always been a popular destination, but it was the advent of mass tourism that changed the city forever. The foundation for this was laid by Mayor Massimo Cacciari in 1990. He propagated privatization as a way of relieving the city's strained finances. Venice opened its doors to global capital. Petra Reski is a German journalist and author who's lived in Venice for 25 years. She's witnessed how the city has sold off its palazzi. Prada bought property, Chinese investors, Benetton and many others.
Large parts of Venice now belong to the Benetton concern. Whole streets, the station for example, the German Chamber of Commerce. A Rococo theater was turned into a hotel restaurant. I've watched it for many years now, and I can see how it's paid off handsomely for many companies.
For her novels, Petra Reski conducts research into mafia circles, into the quagmire of political intrigues and corruption. She knows the tricks investors use to turn dilapidated houses and palazzi, all protected buildings in Venice, into gold mines. The magic phrase is change in designated use, but this requires political approval.
The value of a building lies in what can be made out of it, something saleable, and in being able to renovate whatever you want, not necessarily conforming with protected building regulations. All that lies with the mayor, to change the designated use and thereby make it possible to earn money from the property.
The law relating to change in use often cancels the protected building provision. It doesn't regulate, though, what can be sold in the venerable buildings. So the World Heritage Site is choked with stuff.
I've only been mayor for 12 months, so you can imagine that all this was already waiting for me. Shop owners have certain rights, and as a mayor, I can't just close everything down. We are working out guidelines for such shops and have repeatedly asked the government in Rome to grant an exception for Venice. To this day, this has not been authorized.
The city's direction long seems to have been decided by others, despite negative headlines. For years, environmental activist Tommaso Cacciari, who lives in Venice, has been concerned with the negative consequences cruise tourism has for his city.
Cruise ships cause enormous environmental damage to the city. As children learn in school, a floating body displaces an amount of water equal to its own submerged volume.
Come tra l'altro ci insegnano, credo, alle scuole elementari, un corpo immerso sposta una massa d'acqua pari al volume.
We're talking about 30 to 35,000 cubic meters of water, depending on the ship's tonnage, that every passing cruise ship forces against the shoreline, the buildings and the foundations of Venice. And as soon as the ship sails by, this mass of water is sucked back again.
E poi vengono risucchiate una volta che la nave è passata.
The vast wash stirs up the muddy seabed, undermining again and again the foundations of the city, which in part is built on piles. And the city itself is not the main profit maker from cruise tourism. That's the VTP company, Venezia Terminal Passeggeri, a private offshoot of the Public Port Authority.
Già questo è singolare, no?
That's weird in itself. Why should a public institution which belongs to the people and calls itself Port of Venice, and should actually be serving the common good, set up a listed commercial company to serve the cruise lines, which are nothing but multinational finance companies?
Che invece fa il gioco e, dalle parole del suo presidente, serve le compagnie da crociera.
This joint stock company makes millions of euros because it has a monopoly on distributing harbor moorings.
Milioni di euro perché ha il monopolio degli attracchi, delle banchine d'ormeggio.
The precise turnover is kept dark. The Port Authority chose not to comment. Tommaso Cacciari is hardly surprised, since he too gets no information from them. That's why he's helped set up an action group in Venice. Its slogan, No grandi navi, no cruise ships. They're demonstrating on the banks of the Giudecca Canal, which is passed through up to 20 times a day by ocean-going giants entering and leaving the port. The protesters want to stop the huge ships sailing through the lagoon altogether. They should use an alternative route and berth outside the city. Today, the activists are planning a secret, rather precarious operation.
We've been saying it for 4 years. These ships are too big for Venice. The volumes of water they set in motion are too big. They are destroying our buildings, our historic monuments, our foundations. They cause too much pollution. Just one ship emits as much particulate matter and nanoparticulates as 14,000 vehicles.
The demonstrators intend to block the canal and prevent 3 cruise ships leaving. It's not only in Venice that cruise tourism is seriously damaging the environment. Germany's Nature Conservation Union has criticized the lack of exhaust purification on these ships worldwide. They're fueled by heavy oil, which emits 100 times the pollutants of standard truck diesel.
We'll continue to block the canal. At least for a few hours, it doesn't belong to the companies that own these ships anymore. The canal is part of the public space again, belonging to the city and its people.
Venice isn't alone in choosing a private sector structure for its port. Barcelona's port, Europe's biggest for cruise ships, is also partly privatized. The city was not always so attractive to tourists. The turning point was the 1992 Olympic Games. Around 2 billion was invested in road building, hotels, and remodeling the coast. With 12 international concerns, the city undertook the biggest marketing program in its history. It was not long before property prices rocketed. One example, in 1994, the Ritz-Carlton Group opened the Luxury Arts Hotel. The building cost 138 million euros. 12 years later, it was sold to a Singapore-based international consortium for 417 million euros, over 3 times as much.
It's true, the market has gone global in recent years, with a less than democratic policy. This has allowed speculators and international investment funds, of whom we know nothing, to make major investments in our city.
Fons d'inversió internacionals que no tenen cara, que no sabem qui són, no? Hagin fet grans inversions a la nostra ciutat.
Parts of the city are now controlled by people we don't know. They don't live here, so they're not concerned about the negative effects of such speculation.
I que per tant es desentenen dels efectes negatius que puguin fer segons quines activitats especulatives.
In the meantime, property prices have also risen in other districts of Barcelona, the result of gentrification, as in every major city. Districts change their character, new restaurants open up, and the place is suddenly cool. If, in addition, the city is as popular a tourist destination as Barcelona, the tourism intensifies the effect.
canvia també.
That changes the city's identity, of course. I remember going to the Ramblas Boulevard as a child. It was a place to get a coffee, chat with neighbors, and with a lot of culture. Nowadays, the Ramblas is a tourist mile with totally inflated prices that put the locals off. It's become an attraction that has nothing left of its original character.
Amb un passeig banal que no té res a veure amb el que era la seva identitat, la seva ànima i que era el que la feia realment atractiva, no? I per això diem...
That's why we think that tourism has to be managed. It's a good thing in itself, but it needs to be controlled to prevent ghettos developing, so that tourists and locals can be together in one and the same city.
Sempre amable amb tothom, amb els seus veïns i també amb els turistes.
The Catalan architect David Bravo still regularly comes to the boulevard.
Al mateix temps, però, la Rambla...
The Ramblas fulfills an important function in terms of public space. It reveals the problems and conflicts in the city. It doesn't disguise them, but shows them up very clearly. So it's interesting to take a walk here, just to see where we're at and how far tourism has already taken over the city.
Fins a quin extrem el turisme ha arribat a massificar la ciutat.
The number of visitors to Barcelona just keeps on rising. In the year 2000, it was 3 million. In 2017, the city is expecting 10 million tourists. An additional problem is that the tourists tend to keep to a small area. They stay in the old centre, stroll up and down the Ramblas, and visit the famous La Boqueria market nearby. For tourists, it reflects everything they expect from an authentic Mediterranean place. But they rarely come to buy vegetables, meat or fish for the week. A lot of stallholders have already adjusted their range of goods. You can only survive here if you adapt to the needs of the tourists. Whole ham shanks are often just for decoration and photos. Some traders, though, are resisting the trend, especially those who still remember how the market used to be.
It's been like this for 10, 15 years. Before it was normal here. People came to shop. Now it's more like, how shall I say, more like a circus.
Opened in 1840, La Boqueria was until recent years the main market for the inhabitants of Barcelona. David Bravo liked shopping in the market halls, steeped in tradition. Nowadays, he only comes to conduct studies.
Evidentment, quan el mercat de la Boqueria va canviar...
When the market changed its range of wares, it became less and less worthwhile for locals to shop here. Not just because the prices have gone up, but because what's on offer is no longer what they want for their everyday life. Before we convert the place into a delicatessen shop, it might make more sense to return the public space that once existed here to the people.
Que ens tornessin la plaça, l'espai públic que hi havia aquí abans.
When public space is increasingly restricted and globalized, cities lose an important cultural resource and ultimately their attitude to life. Saturday morning in the historic center of Dubrovnik. Only 1,000 people now live here. 20 years ago, it was 5 times as many. One of the few people to have lived abroad and returned to their home city is cultural anthropologist Anna Tovela. She's interested in the effect mass tourism has on the cultural identity of cities and represents Dubrovnik in the European Cultural Parliament. At the weekend, she likes to get to know the market traders personally.
For us, they always have fair prices. I don't know how much they sell to tourists. You know, what they sell, they sell, sort of thing. I want them on a medal. They give me food. I don't want to get on the wrong side of them.
Like parts of Barcelona and Venice, the old quarter of Dubrovnik, with its city walls, is a World Cultural Heritage Site. The city was already a popular tourist destination before 1990. Since the end of the Croatian War, it's rapidly developed into a magnet for visitors. April to October sees an average of 1.7 million tourists, up to 15,000 on some days, most arriving on cruise ships.
Life in an overcrowded city like Dubrovnik doesn't feel like life in a megacity like Tokyo, Seoul or New York. In Dubrovnik, life is artificially densified and therefore very claustrophobic. I think this makes the locals anxious. We are no longer so attached to our city and don't actually feel that it still exists for us. We are physically restricted because the city is too small. At the same time, we are also mentally constricted by the people who determine the fate of the city.
In the last 5 years, I've been very involved in developing the film industry. At the moment, Dubrovnik is the biggest open-air film studio in the world. We host Game of Thrones and Star Wars. Next year, Robin Hood will be filmed in Dubrovnik. The producer is Leonardo DiCaprio. We'll be the backdrop for Nottingham. Now, we're becoming victims of our own success.
The city as a Hollywood backdrop. The glamour is attracting even more tourists. They may well bring in more money than cruise passengers, who might buy an ice cream before scooting back to the ship and their all-inclusive accommodation. This sort of tourism in particular makes it difficult for cities to develop alternative concepts, as Anna Zuvela well knows. She's researched the issue in other European cities as well.
Most world cultural heritage sites which battle with the problem of mass tourism have one thing in common. They're not in charge of their own affairs, Dubrovnik included. Dubrovnik is actually led by the global monetary flow and the global economy. It's no longer self-determining. In this regard, the city also has no political administration, but more of a management. The city is understood more as a business operation than a permanently inhabited, living, public organism.
But what if the city no longer exists as a communal place for its inhabitants? If it increasingly becomes a travel destination with global marketing potential? What sort of inhabitant would the city then need?
Think about it. If we manage the city as a tourist destination, if we run it like a hotel, what does it need? Not academics or creative staff. It simply needs service providers, cooks, chambermaids, waiters, and so on.
With disastrous results, Dubrovnik is suffering a brain drain, the exodus of qualified workers and artists. Their skills are simply no longer in demand. But some take a different view of the changes in Dubrovnik.
It's largely the older generation who complain about tourism. In their day, people worked in various sectors. Now, tourism has become the main industry in Dubrovnik. The older inhabitants are the ones who mainly struggle with the changes. They like things the way they were, while we young people accept and welcome all the positive changes which globalization is bringing us. Young people are just happy at the chance of work.
Hi, are you Game of Thrones fans?
Diana Marlais has set up her own business in Dubrovnik with an escape room in which visitors have an hour to solve a puzzle, an adventure game inspired by the Game of Thrones series.
This is all handmade. The whole family helped. The youngest ones especially had a lot of fun. For example, we modeled false eyes and fingers and then pickled them.
Oni su mi pomogli praveći od plastelina recimo i prste i zabavljali su se jako pomagajući mi u pravljenju svih ovih predmeta.
Now, 26-year-old Diana hopes for a lot of tourists so she can make money with her idea.
I see tourism positively. We should be glad to live in such a beautiful city which attracts millions of tourists. We have a lot of work opportunities, and if you're a bit creative, you can do well.
The city is an exception. There are jobs here. Across the country, a third of young people are unemployed. In Dubrovnik, though, tourism has completely disrupted social and economic structures. A tourist guide here can earn more than a professor, a cleaner more than a teacher. Who can blame young people from wanting to be on the winning side?
I'm showing here what's currently happening in Dubrovnik. I call it hyper-branding, the fusion of Dubrovnik's history with modern brands like Coca-Cola. This bottle was produced in a limited number for just 3 European cities: London, Rome, and Dubrovnik. Coca-Cola recognized the importance of these cities. We're part of a small circle of leading brands. So how we organize life in the city depends on me as mayor and the citizens.
Cola culture as a souvenir. Memories of the city merged with the brand. What's that worth to Enterprise Dubrovnik?
We don't talk about numbers. We talk about power.
But whose power is it? How self-determined can a city remain that increasingly sells itself? The danger of being controlled by international investors and consortiums is great. But it's also in the nature of democratic cities that their citizens fight back. The Venetians who remain are not giving up without a fight. They've been blocking the Giudecca Canal now for 2 hours, preventing 3 cruise ships from leaving. Politicians, scientists, and citizens' action groups have been arguing for 5 years about alternative concepts for cruise tourism, but so far without success.
It's all gone as planned. A lot of people have joined us and we've managed to block the ships. That's exactly what we wanted. And now they're coming.
It looks like a battle between David and Goliath, between a few activists and all-powerful corporations. They're based abroad and reap their profits in tax havens like Panama.
You are not welcome! We blocked you for over 2 hours because you are not welcome in our city! You are too big! You are destroying our houses! You are destroying our lagoon and our city! You are a stupid way of tourism! You are destroying...
The travel companies sell the passage through the lagoon as a cruise highlight. Would they still call it Venice if they had to sail around the city? What consequences would it have for the private company VTP? Questions the Port Authority could answer, but they didn't want to make a statement, neither on camera nor in writing. The cruise market is dominated by the Anglo-American Carnival Corporation. Their 25 subsidiaries include Italian-sounding names like Costa Crociere and the Germany-based AIDA Cruises. Is such a mighty consortium at all assailable?
Today was very positive. We managed to stop the ships for 2 hours and we did it by swimming. What we normally do with our boats, this time we achieved with our bodies alone. We demonstrated the disparity between a city on a human scale and these floating monsters which invade our city every day.
And they intend to repeat the strategy. Meanwhile, UNESCO has warned that Venice's status as a World Cultural Heritage Site is threatened unless measures to protect the lagoon are adopted soon. The UN Commission can't itself take action in this regard. It can only make recommendations. But in Venice, such recommendations do not seem welcome.
I say unequivocally, UNESCO is doing nothing. I believe they profit from the name of Venice, making life difficult for us in the process. They're gaining publicity for themselves. It's not clear what UNESCO has done for Venice, but it is clear how important Venice is for UNESCO. UNESCO may not survive, but Venice certainly will. The city has survived for thousands of years and will continue to do so. We will not be blackmailed.
For the cultural heritage designation, though, cities are committed to protecting not just their monuments, but the overall appearance of the city. To stop St. Mark's Square becoming a camping site, stewards point out the rules to tourists.
Buongiorno.
Hello. Do you speak Italian? You're not allowed to sit here.
Venice's most famous square dates from the 9th century. A historic site for great state ceremonies and festivals. Visitors should respect that.
They asked me at what time do we put water in the square so they can, I don't know, wash their feet, but it depends on the moon, so it's not a theme park. So somebody asked me, how can I go back? Back where? This is not a theme park. You don't have to come back to the main entrance.
Feeding the pigeons in the square is also strictly forbidden. The birds' droppings damage the building's facades.
No food to the birds. It's not allowed. Thank you. No feeding, no food. It's forbidden. You can receive a fine.
A losing battle. The work of the law enforcers reflects Venice's fundamental problem with tourism. There are just too many visitors. And once they leave after a few hours, the city faces its next major challenge. Tourists leave behind 53,000 tons of rubbish every year. Getting rid of it is complicated with Venice's narrow alleyways and many bridges. In the city without road traffic, garbage has to be removed by boat. Laborious logistics, which cost 80 million euros a year. A large part is borne by the local authority. Before the first tourists flood in, Venice has a big cleaning job. The area around St. Mark's Square is Luca de Pieri's patch. Every day, he and his colleagues make sure that the rats don't take over the city. The inhabitants have to follow strict rules about when to put their rubbish out.
This lot is here because the residents can put their rubbish out from 6 in the morning.
Al mattino, dopo le 6, le persone possono depositare l'immondizia fuori del...
Sadly, passers-by sometimes add their own garbage.
Però poi può succedere che altra gente passi e aggiunga dell'altra immondizia, per cui si accumulano un po' queste...
You end up with a pile like this, but we take it with us anyway, of course.
Portiamo via comunque.
Glass, plastic, paper. Luca de Pieri has to cope with mixed rubbish every day. The residents should actually separate it.
Per cui qui the
rubbish you see on the ground here and in the corners comes almost exclusively from tourists. It's not separated, of course, because so far it's not been possible to install suitable rubbish bins that would allow tourists to separate their garbage.
Adesso differenziarlo, trovare degli appositi contenitori per poter fare la differenziata anche con I turisti.
We've also established that visitors in holiday apartments aren't necessarily well informed about the rubbish separation system in Venice. Separated rubbish is collected on different days. Tourists often put out paper or plastic trash on the wrong day, but that's not their fault. The fault lies with the people who don't inform them properly.
La colpa, tra virgolette, è di chi non gli dà le informazioni giuste.
Growing mountains of rubbish, constant arrivals and departures, hordes of tourists always following the same trails. The city's visitors are becoming an anonymous mass, which appears to be there only to bring in the money. Professor Jan van der Borch teaches the subject of economics and tourism at the University of Venice. He's looked behind the scenes of the tourist industry and is especially interested in the sector's labor market.
If you look at the structure of the tourism industry, you see that there's a lot of space for the informal grey or black kind of activities. It means people working in the kitchen without contracts and so forth. And in fact, talking with people from the tax office, there is this saying that points out that Naples and Venice are the cities where tax evasion is the highest.
When not even the city authorities know precisely how many tourists come, it's hard to determine what income they actually generate. Among the highest earners in Venice are the gondoliers. They make up to €200 an hour, but their number is limited to 360, making gondolier licenses highly sought after. They're in the hands of a few families, not in the gift of the city. The authorities charge only €40 a year for using the canals.
Under the table, though, up to €500,000 being paid from one gondolier to the beginning gondolier, and this money is being earned back in about 5 years' time. So the average earnings of a gondolier are about €100,000 per year. The strange thing is, although it's an activity that the license exchanges under the table, so there's no proof, banks have been financing this kind of operation with a mutuos.
The city taxes gondoliers on the basis of a notional income of just €35,000. No receipts are required. But who's counting in such a romantic situation?
Well, they also work very hard. Without the gondolas rocking in the water, Venice would not be such a special place. Let's be honest. Why should I assess how much someone is allowed to earn? I don't ask what a scientist or a musician or a singer earns, or footballers. We're talking about Barcelona. Let's discuss footballers' earnings. Are they justified? If they fill the stadium, then yes. Maybe a good gondolier contributes to the economic upswing of the city, and I can assure you these people have a big heart. That's why I think it's right for gondoliers to make a decent living. The problem is not how much someone earns, but whether we can all live well together.
But thanks to mass tourism, living well together is no longer the case in many cities. Barcelona is famed for its cosmopolitan atmosphere, but that's changing, along with the idea of hospitality that Airbnb, for example, propagates. But how can tourists know if they're renting legally or illegally? Will Airbnb inform its customers about it in future? The company declined to comment, but the mayor is already taking action.
They promote illegal apartments. We can't allow that. That's fraudulent competition and creates problems between neighbors. That's why we've stepped up our monitoring and have already closed hundreds of illegal apartments. We can also impose fines on these websites of up to €600,000. That's our approach to solving this issue.
In addition, the city is no longer issuing licenses for hotels and holiday apartments in the old city centre. But a lot of people who let legally to tourists feel themselves criminalised by the current criticism, like Elisabeth Casañas, who runs a blog on the subject. She lets her own flat and those of friends.
We at the Pro Viviendas Turísticas platform want to point out that nearly 50% of people living from holiday apartments are women.
¿vale? Entonces, claro, para nosotros, igual que para mí.
For us, for me, for example, it's a chance of working for ourselves. I can coordinate work and family, organize everything for me independently.
Mi vida laboral con mi vida familiar, porque yo lo puedo controlar.
When guests arrive, Elizabeth Casañas always meets them personally. She explains where to put the garbage, what's permitted in the building and what's not. 40-year-old Elizabeth applied for her letters license years ago. It would no longer be possible in her area. She sees the city's controls as a step in the wrong direction.
In reality, we are part of a society that's engaged in business, works hard and makes an effort. They can't just put these difficulties in our way. This strategy sorts out nothing, just the opposite. It's all encouraging a sort of tourism phobia, fear of strangers in our city.
Está acentuando, ya no es la turismofobia, está acentuando la xenofobia en esta ciudad.
A paradox is evident in Barcelona. On the one hand, tourists are ostracized with slogans. On the other, posters are flaunted saying, "Refugees welcome." But mass tourism has not come about by chance. It's the result of long-term policies, which on the one hand have canvassed for more and more tourists, while on the other hand have for years failed to invest in either affordable homes or subsidized housing at the expense of its citizens. In Dubrovnik, too, some people are no longer prepared to accept the situation in the old quarter. Ljubo Nikolic, a member of an environmental party, is fighting against a plan to extend the harbour and lease it out to a Franco-Turkish consortium for 40 years.
We in the Action Group are protesting against the fact that the terms of the contract were secret. The preliminary agreement was signed and kept secret, so we didn't know what obligations the municipality would incur, what sort of infrastructure, for instance, we would have to provide. We'll be jointly investing, the city in the public sphere, the consortium in private fields. The fact is, we'll be handing over a valuable maritime resource for 40 years to parties whose concept we don't know. The concession holder is certainly interested in further increasing the number of visitors, but without adapting to the possibilities here, that would lead to the death of the community. The city would be nothing but a tourist destination.
The very architecture of the city might prevent this development. One study has calculated that Dubrovnik's old centre has room for a maximum of 7,000 people. On some days, more than double that number arrive. The critical issue is that the medieval city walls have only 3 entrances and exits.
Safety issues represent a major hazard for Dubrovnik. According to the evacuation plans, only 3,500 people can be safely brought out of the city. There are days in Dubrovnik, though, when cruise ships alone bring in more than 8,000 visitors.
The mayor has long been aware of these risks.
Every sports hall in Europe, every pop concert has more people in a confined space. Football stadiums hold crowds of 50 to 100,000 people. Should we ban football or concerts because a lot of people gather in a small space? Obviously, nobody wants that.
Despite the lack of security concepts, the old city seems destined for rising numbers of tourists. Is Dubrovnik in danger of becoming an open-air museum? Cruise companies calculate just 4 hours for the visit. Then the passengers must return to the ship. It's understandable that the inhabitants of Europe's favorite tourist destinations are critical of this sort of tourism and feel pressured.
In many cases, though, the tourists themselves are victims of this uncontrolled system. We have to realize that the rights of a city, the idea of a city, requires that all public areas can be used by all, by the residents of a district as well as by visitors from outside.
Viuen al barri, però pel foraster que és de fora, no? Si no tinguéssim clar aquest principi, començaríem a...
If we don't accept this principle, we're entering very dangerous territory. We're heading towards xenophobia, the rejection of immigrants and everything coming from outside.
Per tant, és molt important entendre...
It's important to understand the enemy is not the tourists, but all those who support the system of exploitative tourism, which creates wealth for the few and socializes the losses.
Que només concentra la riquesa en poques mans I socialitza les pèrdues a tota la ciutat, no?
Losers on both sides, therefore, the local inhabitants and the tourists. They're just extras in a game worth billions. The winners are others, opaque consortiums and international investors who perpetuate the myth of Venice Co. The cities, meanwhile, are desperately trying to save themselves from collapse.
You solve the problem of too many people as restaurants do, by charging more. You raise the price on the free market, and fewer people come.
We want to initiate a democratic debate in the city. The tourism model determines what sort of city we live in. We want citizens to decide for themselves about essential things like tourism, because that's the nature of democracy.
If people want to see Venice someday, there's a reason. Let's look at the beautiful things in the city.
They still exist, the beautiful things, but their number is limited. More and more people want to see them for themselves. And who can blame them?